Hi, Sam here, being joined by Emma and Mark F. And we'll be discussing Introduction to Christianity by Ratzinger tonight. Yeah, you can tell I'm obviously very experienced at this. I started to put it towards the screen instead of the camera. So, of course, I don't know. Maybe having the two of them together would help this process, but regardless, that's not the way it's set up. So, um, anyways, with that, just a quick programming note. I know I said in the intro video that we'd be discussing the prefaces and part one, but we'll just be doing the prefaces tonight. So if you are reading it, definitely read the preface. Unlike a lot of prefaces, it's not like historical background information. It actually is written by Ratzinger. And there's three, but really two of them are basically acknowledgments and a few notes. But the one that we'll be discussing more in depth tonight is the 2000 preface, which, yeah, starts out the edition that I have here. So, yeah, just real quickly, I'll let Mark and Emma introduce themselves and tell us anything they want to about themselves.
Okay, I guess we're going to go across the screen here.
Yeah,
That's
I
me.
guess I'll start with Mark.
Yeah, so can't get myself in the middle. So I'm Mark F, Mark Ferreira, if you want. I'm one of the mods on BOM. I'm the only Catholic mod as it is standing currently. Became Catholic a few years ago after growing up with no spirituality at all. Long search, long story. But the main reason I wanted to do this is Sam's great, and so is Emma, and it's a great chance to have nice discussions every now and then. I'd also listen to Introduction to Christianity on audio, and I remember standing at the bus station at 7 in the morning thinking, "Oh wow, I'm gonna need to read this," because it was just things were going by me, and I wasn't able to properly take in what it was what was happening. And I should have known this was going to happen because I listened to Ratzinger's Jesus of Nazareth, the first volume of that, and I came to the same conclusion of wow, I need to read this book. I don't know why I thought Intro to Christianity would be any lighter. It's not, and it's also just as great. So I'm really looking forward to discussing the whole of this book.
All right, thank you, Mark.
All
Emma?
right. I'm Emma. I'm currently a graduate student in classics. I'm also Catholic, though not a mod on Bridges of Meaning, but I am on Bridges of Meaning. Um, yeah, I've never actually read anything by Cardinal Ratzinger or Pope Benedict the 16th before. But I've really been meaning to for a while, so this was a good opportunity to sort of push me to jump in. So thank you.
All right, so yeah, about myself, I guess, yeah, I'm the one person here who isn't Catholic. And with that, yeah, it's something that, though I've read Ratzinger not as much recently, but a fair amount, especially when I was in my 20s. And it's something where I just feel kind of incredibly blessed to have a couple people to read it with who are engaging with it on a pretty high level. And I think we'll have a lot of interesting things to add. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I guess real quickly, so I guess Emma kind of got at this already, but for and if there's something else you want to add, by all means, Emma. But what's sort of your background in reading Ratzinger, Mark?
Oh, sorry, me. Uh, so yeah, as I said, I've listened to two books before, uh, this and Jesus of Nazareth. I've also read some of his lectures in other places. But Sam, I think it'd probably be worth asking, why is a Protestant reading Joseph Ratzinger, and why is he interested, and why did he read him in his 20s? Right?
You know,
It's a question to ask. It's
yeah,
obvious
no,
why I
it's
am.
a yeah, it's a good question, and it's something where I think about it, and I actually had been 21. I remember because it was the summer I'd spent in California, and I must have intuited that there was something more to him as a writer than was just kind of obvious if all you knew about him was his public persona, because I had randomly picked up the book at a public library. Jesus of Nazareth, Part One. And yeah, I just was really drawn to the language and the way that it's both um, plain, but it's also very dense too at the same time. And it's something where I don't think you have to be someone who necessarily has a huge background with the material to be able to get into it and enjoy it. But it also, I think it's like a lot of great literature where you can enjoy it on very different levels. And yeah, there really is several different things going on where there's the sort of intellectual and academic parts to it, but there's also a mystical kind of element to a lot of it also. There's a very, I guess I'll go back to this word, well, maybe say straightforwardness to the language, where you think of like a lot of the more English, Anglo kind of writers, and there's more of a winsomeness to their writing. But with Ratzinger, like the language is so it's just so there on the page, but it's also has several like layers and different meanings, and he really is just someone who's a brilliant writer and thinker. And yeah, I've enjoyed reading quite a few of his works. Yeah, I was just kind of taking notes. Besides the Jesus of Nazareth books, other things I've read of his were Truth and Tolerance, the On Consciousness, which is a collection of essays, and then also his, I believe it was a collection of encyclicals that was published under the heading Paul of Tarsus. So they were about St. Paul. And yeah, with that, yeah, I guess maybe this will be a question for the discussion, but I'm kind of curious to know if this was your first time reading something by Ratzinger, what was it like? And was it kind of a little bit crazy and over the top, or was it something where you were able to sink into it pretty easily? But yeah, so
I think Emma should go for that one.
So I guess that question is for me.
Yeah. Yep, I guess we could go right in.
Maybe.
He's a very clear thinker, and I enjoyed that a lot. It's funny because the translation for my copy put some of the German words in brackets when it felt that it was necessary.
Yeah.
Which was entertaining. But a lot of what I got from this, it's laid out very clearly, and also like some people say a lot. They say a lot of words without a lot coming across in them, and that's not the case here. Every single sentence is like packed with significance, I feel like.
Is it almost like the
So
Jordan
I really
Peterson
enjoyed
thing?
it.
Like, you choose your words carefully.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's something that's maybe a little off field, but I thought it was a pretty entertaining point and something that's relevant to the discussion. So tonight we're discussing the prefaces, but when you get into part one, so there's about 30 pages of the prefaces, and then there's 50 pages of part one. And part one is literally, it's based on not the first like line of the Apostles' Creed, but the first two words. It's I believe, and
it's even worse in Latin because it's credo. That's
just
all it is.
So yeah, hopefully that doesn't scare anyone off, but I guess if it does, it does. So, yeah. So, um, yeah,
It's not for the faint of heart. And I think intro to Christianity is such a misleading term because when you think of intro, I've read a lot of intro books. This does not feel like an intro book to me.
yeah,
This feels definitely like, a high up in your BA, maybe starting grad school sort of book.
yeah. I guess
Well,
I
didn't he
was.
literally deliver it to grad students?
Was it grad students? I know it was lectures.
It was either undergrad or grad students, but I think it was like a summer session, which makes me think it was grad students.
Okay.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go, which is that it was a series of lectures originally, and I guess the impression that I got, because yeah, the title is a bit of a mystery if you just pick up the book and start reading, is that it was designed for people who were maybe thinking about the topics at a fairly high level. Um, Maybe undergrad, but probably at least like upper levels. And with that, but who weren't necessarily Christians per se, is what I got out of that. So, like, yeah, maybe, I don't know, the book would be geared towards someone like, I don't know, like Vervaeke. So,
Oh, if only, if only. I mean,
yeah.
did you see that video with Paul this morning? No, sorry, not his video with Paul this morning. He released his Vervaeke interview, and I guess Vervaeke hadn't read Mere Christianity before. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and Paul pitched it to him, and he wrote it down in a note saying, "Oh, this is interesting,"
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
it is. I mean, that was one of the first books on Christianity I ever read.
Hmm. Yeah. So, yeah. So I guess besides the language, in terms of themes and things like that, what really stood out to, well, either one of you in the prefaces?
So maybe I'll go first because this has been on my mind. Um, in addition to this book, I also just finished a book on the First Vatican Council, and what you really get in there is a fight between liberalism and tradition. Essentially, those are the two main camps, and that fight kind of goes on and doesn't end like at all. In some ways, some people will say the Second Vatican Council is liberalism. I don't agree, but that just continues on, and that's what Ratzinger kind of addresses in his that man has been searching for something to replace the Christianity it's kind of discarded as its main grand narrative. We tried totalitarianism. Marxism was supposed to be the only thing that could replace it in terms of Christianity's full weight and might and the capture of imagination, but it just didn't work. And then the next point he goes on after 1968, which is the explosion, especially in Europe and particularly in France, is 1989, where the wall comes down, and then we all kind of sitting here thinking, well, what's next? And no one, some people may have wanted Christianity to come to the fore, and that's what he says in here, right? Is this was Christianity's grand moment to step forward onto the stage, and it just didn't. Nothing happened, as far as anybody can tell. I mean, we get the 1990s, and then 2000s come around, and this is right before the War on Terror. Is this preface, right? It's the 2000 edition, as far as I can tell, right? So it's a mystery in some ways, but not from where we're standing in the 2020s, where we've seen this tension play out even more than Ratzinger was able to see at the time he wrote this. But he was able to see the beginnings of it. And even farther back in the 50s, where he said, the old church, basically the last era of the Tridentine church, is dying because it was a termite ridden facade where people were just going through the motions but didn't really know what was going on. So it was just such a theme that hit me why didn't Christianity take hold? And we know because people were still too skeptical of grand narratives, and Christianity is the grandest narrative that one can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he definitely has the idea of modern ideologies and liberalism generally on his mind. I guess one of the things I think about is, was he writing this as a, because sometimes in other works he does write explicitly against the ideas of like sort of liberal theology or Christianity, but I guess I got the sense that he probably intended this to be in some ways a more ecumenical work, you know? Like
I don't know, you want to take that one?
Sure. I mean, he mentions at some point that he's actually been, I think it's the preface to the 1969 edition, that he's really happy with how, a little surprised and really happy with how well it's been received across denominational lines. And he credits a couple of pastors who helped him compile the index of Bible passages in the back of the book. So even it may not have been like originally intended to be more ecumenical, but it's definitely become that.
Yeah, just another point I'd put out there is, in terms of fighting liberal theology, he does mention liberationist theology as
Mhm.
being, Christianity trying to take Marxism within itself and essentially appropriate it, but it doesn't work because his main criticism is it devalues Christ, right? Christ becomes just the herald of the revolution speaking for the oppressed proletariat as opposed to the God man who transcends all categories. And it brings it back in an interesting way to Fulton Sheen in his Life of Christ, where he says you get two main heresies, right? Christ is either too human or too divine, right? And in this case, Marxism he makes him a bread king, right?
Mhm.
He brings
That's
him
the
down.
language he uses too.
Yeah, I think it's the perfect way to do it, where he's the bread from heaven that feeds us at a level we can't understand, but we feel.
Yeah. So one of the things that struck me, and maybe this is a good point to get into it. So the way he defines Marxism. So I'll just go ahead and read it because I think he could probably say it better than I could. So Marx, the philosopher of theology, adopts the primacy of politics and economics, which has become the real power to bring about salvation. So when I was reading that, one of the things I thought about was, so he sort of presents the problem as Marxism as being materialism. So whereas I mean there's a lot of like sort of conservative kind of anti-Marxist literature that presents Marxism as basically being dysfunctional, but doesn't necessarily go after the metaphysical claims of Marxism.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, like that definition, like you can almost replace libertarianism or utilitarianism in that sentence, and it almost reads the same way. Like I put in the notes here below that quote, productivity is the central purpose of the rational man's life, Ayn Rand. And I was thinking about those two quotes in contrast to each other and how they're really sort of mirror images of the same problem. Because I guess, I mean, Marxism isn't in some ways a big force in the modern US or in Canada, but it's something where the idea of materialism, I think, is definitely very much with us, whether you attribute that to Marx or to other forces in culture.
Yeah, actually, I had almost the same note, where he writes, anyone who makes Marx the philosopher of theology adopts the primacy of politics and economics, which now becomes the rational powers that can bring about salvation, and if misused, can wreak havoc. And above that, I just wrote, conservatives do this too.
Oh,
The
shots
whole
fired.
like politics are how we fix the world. Like, the US is coming up to an election cycle. Try and tell me that both sides aren't talking about how, like, if we just elect the right guy, we'll save the world and we'll fix the country.
Yeah, I mean, you're right on the money there. I mean, Sam was so correct. It's like you could just put Ayn Rand objectivism or utilitarianism. It's the god of make the line go up on the graph, right? It's more stuff is the point. And the whole rest of that, spiritual or finding meaning, you'll find meaning in consuming the next product, right? That's the right wing version of Marxist materialism, right? It's almost, I don't want to say it's a product of pluralism, but in some ways it feels like it, where if you can't agree on those first metaphysical principles, you have to find something else that can fill that kind of void where for
Mhm.
so long people were still kind of going off the traditions that had, set everything up. And then when people actually finally discarded them for what amounts to a negation principle for grand narratives. The only principle is consume product, or in
Mhm.
Marxist terms, it's everyone get free product. That's the point.
Well,
Number go up.
yeah. Well, I guess it's all this Huxley thing, right? It's not so much a substitute for meaning as it's a distraction from meaning, right?
Mhm.
I mean, it's chasing the soma.
Yeah, and you know
Yeah.
what, Benson?
Claiming the right to be unhappy.
Yeah, there's that. And I was going to say, Benson identifies this in Lord of the World, where he says materialism doesn't work until you add the therapeutic. And then people can take it because you can, with the therapeutic, soothe people's consciences and the absolute mental illness that gets generated by a pure materialist outlook.
Yeah, you need something to deal with that.
It's tough.
Now you're the one firing shots.
So, I'm tempted to start talking about the things that he has to say about belief in the first section, but I'll hold back on that for the time being since it
But
wasn't.
what about those ideas of the Eastern religions he brings up, right?
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
one of the things that he says is so attractive about them is the non-exclusivity,
Mm,
where
Yeah.
the Christian religion, no matter almost all of it, aside from the universalists, right, is there's one way, and if the other ones are just, they have elements of truth, but the point is he is the way, the truth, and the life. And
mm,
if we give that up, we give up the whole of the religion, and it's so out of fashion and so revolutionary in a world that says no. The pluralist impulse has to be appeased in a way to say that you have to negate that.
mm.
And it's so
Mhm.
uncomfortable. I know for me, one of the hardest things coming into the church was, outside the church, there is no salvation, with caveats, but it's tough, right? It's a huge, huge ask. And the other portion is that institutional aspect. Protestants, Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, no matter where you go, we're an institutional religion. You have to be a part of a community and a group. You can't just do this on your own for the most part, except if if you're some very gifted vocation where you get to be a monk and make birds. I don't know.
Yeah, but there's a reason that hermits very quickly gave way to monasteries.
Yes, you want just add on that.
Just in terms of the history, like the hermit lifestyle was sort of the first step, but then it was only a couple hundred years before that was much more standardized as monasteries where these monks would live in community with each other because it wasn't good for them to be off completely on their own for more than a couple years.
Yeah, I don't think the stylites were. I was a weird craze if you remember reading about that.
Yeah.
Sam, do you know who the stylites are?
I did not. Sorry about that.
So they were monks who would literally live on top of a pillar in the middle of nowhere and never leave the pillar. It was like a weird kind of phase. I say a phase. It was a few hundred years of people doing this, where
people would come by and just throw food to them every so often.
Yeah, they're like attractions,
Hmm.
which is kind of sick, but
Yeah.
it's not for everybody.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something where I think that is a temptation, maybe of the faith to kind of view God as not present is the way that Ratzinger would say it. And yeah, so even in my notes here, I was thinking, so he kind of puts on one hand Marxism or materialism, so the bread and circus, and then on the other hand, he contrasts that with Eastern religion, so Gnosticism, so like the idea that God has no name, and the quote I have here, I feel like I'm becoming like Patrick Wagner, just reading things, but no. Actually, if you watch this, we love you, Patrick. You're a great contributor to the corner. So, anyways, so when God is understood in completely impersonal, um, in a completely impersonal way, there is no positive relationship between God and the world. So, on one hand, you have this temptation, which is to maybe look at a lot of sort of the failures of society. He talks about, Marxism, but also Columbia and Pol Pot, which is, I guess, a type of Marxism, but separate from obviously European Marxism. And maybe there's a retreat there where you just say, you know what, I'm done with this. I just kind of want to go at this on my own. The world stinks and I don't want to be a part of it, kind of thing. So, and I guess he kind of puts Christianity sort of kind of in the middle of that, where God is present, but God is also pointing people to something beyond the physical.
Yeah, the material world matters. It's not just something to be overcome, but it's not all there is. And while we're full of spicy takes tonight, I feel like some people
put the cayenne on.
Some people do sort of a soft version of this when they get really Eastern Orthodox curious and start talking about, what is it, cataphatic or apophatic theology. Because Eastern Orthodoxy has a flavor kind of similar to like the Buddhist negations, but within the Christian realm. And I feel like I've seen some people going really hard on the, like, we can't really say much of anything about God and sort of justifying it that way. It's a hard line to negotiate.
It is. It's a tension, right? And tensions are always hard to exist within because you want to come off one way or the other. You want the band to either snap or just go back to some homeostasis where you can just sit nicely in there. And I think you're talking interesting, Sam, about putting it in the middle. He put Buddhism on one end, which is the complete negation. The self is an illusion, right? You are nothing. And then on the other end, he puts Hinduism, which is you're all one. There is no bounds between you. And that in a way, all the interesting changes that you have to get into Hinduism to get things like human rights and try to abolish the caste system and widow burning, you have to impose the Christian concept of persons, right? And the dignity of the individual into that system in a way that it's not native to.
Yeah.
If you're running, that's on page 24.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm just kind of thumbing through it a little bit. So, but yeah, no, the way he says it, is the world is not just Maya. So the world is bread, or I shouldn't say it that way. The world contains bread, and it contains nourishment, but it's not only that. And I think back in reading that to. One of the sections of Jesus of Nazareth that really struck me the most was the section about Jesus's temptations in the desert. And if you think about it, he sort of offers kind of alternate paths for Christ. So one is obviously the political liberators. So the one who turns rocks to bread. Another is sort of the supernaturalist, or almost kind of like a magician. And then he also talks about, well, I guess the bread and the politics are tied to each other, even though they're not, even though they are separate in terms of the temptations. But yeah, and you think about that as like, okay, so I guess one of the things I've heard, and I mean, I don't know, maybe Tom Holland or PVK would dispute this a little, but there is a real sense in which if you think of, okay, what is the purpose of Christ? And if he's purely a political person, there's definitely a way in which you would look at that and you could say, yeah, he was a failure, right? I mean, the Jerusalem fell less than 50 years after Christ's death, right? So, in that sense, you got to look at it and you got to be like, okay, so what was the message and what was he trying to convey, and how does it affect, I guess, I don't know, maybe sound like a little evangelical. How does it affect our lives, or how do we apply it in the world, right? Yeah.
No, I think you're definitely on there. I'm making the connection too to Sheen because I'm reading too many books at once. First of all, so he makes the same connections too that Ratzinger does with the three temptations are the three opposites of what you're supposed to get out of it, right? And on the political front, offering the kingdoms of the world without the cross. Every single one of them is without the cross, without the cross, without the cross. And it's the cross that saves the physical world because it is good, right? We're not trying to escape it forever. We're trying to redeem it to what it should be, in the highest form, as opposed to this is the illusion we have to break free of. No, we're trying to correct it. And that's going to take suffering, unfortunately. And there's no way that we can get to the glory without it.
The cross is where heaven and earth meet.
Yeah, I mean, literally, it's pointing up and inserted into the ground at the same time, with arms outstretched, encompassing the whole of the world.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking here, this is something that's not even like in my notes or even necessarily explicitly in the text, but is there a way in which I guess modern people in general are isolated from suffering, and that makes the cross a difficult thing?
Yeah, so there's a great man on the server called Greg, and Greg has experienced a great deal of suffering. And when I first talked to him, he gave me this test, which was some scale of, your trauma. And I scored so low that he started laughing and saying, "You are the only person I've ever met in my life who has experienced nothing." Nothing in terms of suffering. It's like you lived in like a 1980s movie where I scored 0.
Wait, don't you work in bomb detection, basically? I feel like that would involve some trauma. Sorry. I know, way off topic.
No, fair game. Right? But just on that point, I know I've lived a coddled life. And I'll reveal my own confession that I went through on Monday, and I said I'm afraid of suffering because I don't know how to suffer well. And I think if I had some real suffering in my life, it would come more easily to me than it does. And that's a super amazing point that you made is, do any of us really know how to suffer if we're just, middle class kids who grew up in the suburbs, and then we're being told, oh yeah, you might have to carry the cross up to Golgotha to follow him. Are you willing to do that? Or are you going to be the rich boy who says, I can't give up my possessions, and dejectedly walks away from the one who's before him, right?
Well, yeah, and I definitely think it's one of the temptations of modernity that, the idea and of the feasible, as Ratzinger would put it. So the idea of what we can replicate. I think there's a temptation in that to kind of feel like the world is something that, you control, but really, I mean, you get away from. I don't know about you, but I know I get away from a computer screen for a few days, and maybe even a smartphone, and you start realizing, wow, yeah, there's a lot in the world you don't control really at all. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you wanna jump off there?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess often in modernity, maybe suffering is felt more as a lack of a desired thing or a good thing rather than felt as like active pain.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, I see where you're going. It's the ache of not having.
yeah,
Yeah, as opposed to being actively imposed upon.
yeah. Like I've just based on like what kinds of things we come up against more often, I guess. Not that, I mean, pain still exists as much as we try to eradicate it. But I think it's definitely less common now than it's ever been.
Yeah, I mean, how many people go to funerals regularly? I don't. I can count them. It's not very
Mhm.
many, right? And I even think just back maybe a generation or two, my great uncle lost his legs hiding in the mountains in, I think it was Spain, from the Portuguese draft,
Ooh,
right? That's some
yeah.
hardcore suffering, right? And
Yeah.
that's not even that long ago,
Huh. Yeah.
right? Like my dad grew up in the Civil War in Angola, telling stories about how, he bent over one day to eat his cereal and a bullet went over his head and put a hole in the wall,
Hmm.
or having to go get bread and being stopped by checkpoints. And he knew which side was which just by the guns, because otherwise they look the same. One side is M16s, the other one is AKs.
Hmm.
Like that sort of suffering is just so alien to me that I can't comprehend it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess one of the sort of interesting things as it relates maybe to the discussion a little is that but people who experience that kind of suffering aren't generally skeptical about God and about faith the way that a lot of modern people are. So
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of interesting. We so so one of the notes I made is that the way Ratzinger describes belief, he almost describes it as a kind of psychotechnology that brings people out of themselves. Like that's almost the exact words that he uses. And I think about that, and it's like you kind of wonder to some extent how it goes into, I guess, the medieval mind thing versus a modern mind thing to some extent too, how we're kind of very limited in some ways, even for people who are maybe actively trying to look outside of it by the sort of modern conceptions that we have. I mean, not that there's a lot of wonderful things about modernity. I mean, I'm not looking to
There's a
live
lot of
in
good stuff.
1500s, but
Yeah.
yeah. So
I prefer
Yeah.
not dying of sepsis.
yeah. So well, I probably would have died as a child if I lived in like 1700. So but yeah. So but I guess that's a story for another time. So,
Bonus
yeah.
content for the channel membership.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
I almost died before this video.
No. I really did. I lost probably about half my body weight in a period of about 3 months when I was 6 years old, and yeah, I guess it's something. Yeah, I think about it. Yeah, it's not really. I guess in some ways, honestly, it wasn't. I mean, it is part of my life, but at the same time, you think of the kind of vocabulary you have when you're that age, and it's very limited, and you have a feeling that something's going wrong, but you don't know what exactly at that point. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Did you believe in God then?
Oh, yeah. I definitely believed in God. My parents very much too, and yeah.
So do you think that
uh,
kind of was it a stronger connection after that? Or was it like a cursing, like, what is happening to me?
So I'm not cynical at all about God, and I'm also not cynical at all about evil or other spiritual forces. But I also am kind of, in some ways, very hesitant to attribute specific things that had happened to that. So, I mean, I guess how does it shape me? I can't say, oh, it doesn't shape me at all. It was definitely part of my life. And it was something for a lot of years I probably didn't even think very much at all about. But at the same time, I don't know. I guess, does anyone really understand how their childhood shapes them exactly, no matter what happens in it? I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's kind of a cop out answer. I don't really know, but
I don't think it is a cop out answer. I mean, I don't know. Most people have trouble remembering most of their childhood, right? It's little bits and pieces, sometimes strong things that happen to them. It all just kind of, you weave it together in a narrative, but the more you think about it, the more that narrative kind of falls apart sometimes. I mean, I remember the first time I started thinking about dying, and it terrified me because
mm,
I didn't believe in God,
yeah,
right? I definitely believed nothing. As far as I
mm,
could tell, when you died, and
yeah,
that's the end of it. But that
mm,
didn't sit right with me, and it really terrified me for a very long time. But it didn't motivate me to believe in God, which is a weird situation to be in.
mm, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know, yeah, the abyss, so to speak, is something that everyone experiences on some level, whether you're a believer or not. And I think for a lot of believers, you experience that maybe as doubt and the kind of fear and anxiety that can sometimes have. But yeah, I think the idea of dying, though, is definitely something that um, when yeah, you don't kind of have in the back of your head, you know it's there, but it's not present. And I guess maybe um, I don't know. I guess maybe I'll throw in I guess the Bonhoeffer quote, right? I mean, Christ invites us to come and die, right there. So yeah, so I know I'm butchering that a little bit, but I don't.
Sounds good to me. I've never read it.
Yeah, so so well, yeah, but yeah, so I guess I feel like we're kind of maybe a little off field from anything with like the text, but
I
yeah,
did
no,
actually
so,
want to return to something that you said with
yes, yeah,
psychotechnology. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but like what the Apostles' Creed originally called is the symbolon, right? It's what connects you to heaven, right? It connects what's above to what's beneath.
mm,
Like you were saying, it's a psychotechnology. So the creed condenses all those mystical aspects into words that then produce images in your mind, and you're better able to grasp what's going on, and it almost concretizes the mystery.
Okay. Yeah, so I guess I have one question for you, Mark, before we start maybe heading towards wrapping things up for at least the recording, which is, so you said that you had a very comfortable life, and I know you've been fairly successful with your career and other things like that. So I guess what brought you to faith, or what made you think that there was something that was missing, so to speak, in your life?
So I've gone through it a little bit before, but I'll give the TLDR. Donald Trump won the presidency, and it broke my brain. So I had to completely rethink all my principles from literally. I started with politics, and then I just kept going. I couldn't stop. So I just ate away at every single thing that I believed until I got to zero, and then had to build it right back up again. And I ended up having to come to the conclusion, as far as I could tell, that I couldn't escape at least Aristotle's, Plato's first mover. I couldn't get away from it, right? From there, it's a different set of jumps, but that's really was the catalyst for me.
Okay. Were you involved with faith communities or people who were Christians, like when you were in college, or?
Nope. I can name the Christians that I knew growing up.
Okay.
Name them on a hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, yeah, you talk about Trump, and I guess this kind of ties back a little bit maybe to the stuff with the book and the conversation generally, where I definitely do remember Donald Trump being elected, and I've probably gone through a few phases of my life where I was, I don't know, a little bit wired too much into the political scene than I should have been. And I remember thinking about it. It's like, I mean, a little bit shocked and disappointed, but it's like, I guess if you really believe the gospel, then you believe that God came to earth in the form of a man who was born into a society where he wasn't a citizen, and he was part of a racial group that was not necessarily a minority, but definitely discriminated against and thought of as second class. And then he was ultimately, killed as basically a political criminal. So, I mean, it's definitely very much the scandal of the gospel, which it definitely makes I guess you could say, a mockery of any kind of practical program that you want to apply to it. So Emma, I feel like Mark and I have probably done more talking.
No, you're good. I've been enjoying listening.
Yeah, no, but was there anything that really stuck out to you in the reading that we haven't gone over exactly, or that you thought about maybe in a different way?
I appreciate his discussion of participation and participatory activity, I guess. And about how religion inherently has some of that, and Christianity needs to have some of that. It can't just be that, because he talks about all the people looking for just mystical experiences or voices from the other side, and how they're not getting anywhere. But you can't have a purely propositional faith without that either. It also won't go anywhere or work on you as it should. And he mentions World Youth Day as an example of that. The various World Youth Days he's been to, and the lasting change that sometimes comes about from that. And just the importance of that experience.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a great tie into maybe one of the questions that I kind of had as a takeaway. So I guess if you're maybe trying to sell someone on why they should read a book like Introduction to Christianity, or really any kind of dense work that deals with theology and philosophy, I guess, is there, how does it relate to your faith, and how does it relate maybe to the gospel? Because sometimes I guess you could read a book like this, or you could listen to a discussion and you could think like, oh man, this is just all like Vervaeke style buzzwords, right? But it's not tying back into faith or the way people live in any practical way. It's just kind of I don't know, words on the page, right? So
Yeah, I think they need to feed into each other. Like you have the study and the knowledge about it, and then hopefully that strengthens your experience and grounds it. And at the same time, the experience drives you to want to learn more.
hmm, yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, so I guess a question for Emma, we got at this a little bit, but would you say that this is a good way to start reading Ratzinger if you haven't encountered him at all before, or was this, or did you
So far,
feel
I think
lost at
it's
all with it?
so far I think it's fine, but I also don't think I can be taken as a typical example of anything.
Okay.
So
Yeah, classics. Graduate student.
Yeah. So
I do literally read Greek daily almost. So
hmm,
decoding things is kind of my shtick.
yeah. No, I think one of the big selling points, if anyone was watching this video and they're on the fence, it's what you got too, is that there is a clear thinking to the
Mhm.
language. And while you may hear like the way it's discussed sometimes and like Latin phrases and all that, and you may think like, oh man, that sounds like it could just be a slog. But I didn't necessarily experience it like that at all, or other works by Ratzinger I've read where, I mean, I think the language really does jump off the page. And it is, I mean, you get the sense that like he really does believe what he's writing in a way that sometimes you read modern Christians and like there's almost this kind of apologetic tone to what they're writing. But I mean, yeah, there's definitely a forcefulness to the language, which I think
Yeah.
was very helpful and very compelling to me.
It was
Yeah.
really refreshing to read someone who's just not ashamed at all of what he believes and what he thinks.
Mm.
Like, this is what he thinks, this is what he's built his whole life on, and it is what he will continue to say.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, someone who really is, yeah, world class intellect too. And I mean, it's like,
Hmm.
I don't know, sometimes like you go through, I don't know, like I have the kind of doubts I think a lot of Christians do at some point. And I feel like, oh man, and then I read Ratzinger, who's, I don't know, probably like 40 IQ points above me. And like, there's a part of me, it's like, what's my problem? I mean, this guy seems to get it. But I mean, I guess that's something of a public persona thing too, though, probably. So, but yeah. So, um, were there? I guess Mark talked a little bit about Fulton Sheen's "The Life of Christ," right? Okay, I got the title right. Were there any other books that either one of you, thought about this in relationship to, or that you think that maybe people should be reading together with it?
I don't know if this is a should be reading together with it, but a lot of like the way he writes and the way he thinks reminds me of Dorothy Sayers' Mind of the Maker, which is something
Mm.
I've been reading as well. Which is it's a meditation, but meditation implies sort of a dreamy, like wandering style, and it's a very like logical and carefully thought out study of if we compare God as the creator of the world to human artists and use that analogy the same way we use like the analogy of God the Father, what will it show us about the Trinity?
Hmm.
And I've
And
really been enjoying that.
Why do you tie that in to this? I'm curious.
Mostly like the styles sort of came across as similar to me. The ways they think felt similar to me. But I'm interested to see if like I think they probably will sort of be fruitful in dialogue as I continue through both of them. And I'm interested to see what'll happen because I'm only like maybe a third way through Sayers right now.
I really look forward to hearing that dialogue as we go forward. Let's just say that. I really enjoyed, I think I told you, Sayers' comments on the Divine Comedy.
Yes, I
They're
got
very good.
those. I just got those. Well, the first volume of them. But yeah, I'm looking forward to reading those too. I love her. She's amazing, and I would love to put the two of them in a room together and see what they came up with.
Ask Chat GPT.
Yeah. So that'll be our next project. Like we'll
Right.
create Chat GPT versions of like I don't know, like Ratzinger and I don't know, like Paul Vanderklay or something.
Oh, that'd be good.
Oh boy.
I mean, so I guess just before we wrap up, if you want the book that I'd recommend, it would be George Weigel's To Sanctify the World, which
Ooh.
is a history of the Second Vatican Council. It's good background knowledge and introduces you to Ratzinger at the council and kind of gives you an idea of where he's coming from in general, like the Ressourcement and that sort of school that he and Jean Paul II really bring to the fore after the council. And you can just, it just bleeds into this book, right? There's no way that it doesn't. And if I
Yeah,
were,
I
go
can
ahead.
see that. Oh, I can see how that would. Yeah.
Anyway, that book is great to dispel myths about the Second Vatican Council. It's probably the easiest way to do it without actually reading the documents. Which, shout out to Dave Erbum. Great read. Gaudium et Spes, don't read it. Not worth it. It's not worth it. But yeah, that would be mine. Sanctify the World, George Weigel.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess I'll maybe mention the Ratzinger work, which I think is very relevant to people who are interested in like this little corner things where because he deals a bit with, I guess, moral philosophy a bit in it, and it was a collection of 3 essays, and it was published under the title On Conscience, and they're all available in the public domain. So if you want to look them up, you can find them, and they're a pretty brief read. I mean, you probably could get through in about an hour or so. Yeah, that's definitely something that I would
That's tomorrow
recommend.
for me then.
Yeah. So, and yeah, with that, yeah, I guess I think of Ratzinger and people he's in communication with, and yeah, one of the names that comes to um, my mind is, I mean, they were both Germans, and I think very much shaped by World War II. So I kind of think of Bonhoeffer a lot of the times, and I think the insistence on the Christian life is something that is well, it's practical, I guess, is the way I'll put it, and that's the way that yeah, Ratzinger puts it. But then yeah, and I guess Bonhoeffer uses the language of cheap grace, but I think he's very much getting at a lot of the same ideas. So, any closing words from either of you two before we wrap the recording?
I don't think so. I'm looking forward to getting into the meat of this. I think it'll be a really great read.
Okay. Yep. So,
Yeah,
all right.
just from me, Sam, great work. Single-handedly revived VC on Bridges of Meaning. just by literally asking people to come talk to him, which nobody thought to do before. So 10 out of 10 would recommend Sam.
I feel like I'm
Absolutely.
not that organized of a person, but like
It's so
compared to
crazy
the
how much-
average like bridges of meeting person, I'm like basically, I don't know.
Some
Yeah.
superhuman freak of, I'm going to be on at this time. Would these people who I've talked to before like to come talk this time? That's all it seems to take.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess a side note is yeah, no, I am very grateful to have conversation partners, and I'm really looking forward to diving into the book more. And it's something where a lot of times in my day-to-day life, I'm doing things that are quite frankly mind-numbing. So this is a
Left side
very
equal right
great,
side.
yeah, great change of pace. And I guess, well, yeah, thank you to obviously both of you for joining me tonight, but also thank you to Paul Vanderclay and all the other people who are involved with the server, and because yeah, it really has been a great way to connect with people in general. And yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to more of it.
Yeah, it really has been. I've started telling people that I'm reading Introduction to Christianity with a couple of friends I met on the internet, and they're like, "What?"
You can say,
Awesome.
you can watch the video too.
I'm
Yeah.
probably gonna text at least one of them this video. I don't know
Yeah.
if she'll watch it, but I'll send
Yeah.
it to her.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so I guess I'll maybe wrap up the video then. So, yeah, thanks again for coming on. And yeah, I'll be really looking forward to doing this again. So,
Yeah,
Thanks,
all
Owen.
right. Okay.
thanks. See you later.